My name is Corey, 32 years old, just an average software engineer from Boston. Our monthly family dinner at my parents' suburban home was going normally until Dad dropped a bombshell question about $500,000 I supposedly received. I froze in confusion while my sister Natalie went ghostly pale across the table. The comfortable atmosphere shattered instantly, leaving me completely blindsided. Before I continue this unbelievable story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like and subscribe button if you want to discover the shocking truth behind this mysterious money and the painful family secret it revealed. To understand why that question about $500,000 hit me like a freight train, you need to know about my family dynamics. My father, Leonard, is 63 and built his accounting firm from nothing into a regional powerhouse. He has always been the embodiment of success, with his tailored suits, luxury cars, and country club memberships. But that success came with sky-high expectations for his children. Dad always wanted us to follow in his footsteps. Business, finance, real estate. Anything that made serious money was acceptable in his eyes. I still remember his disappointed face when I announced I wanted to study computer science instead of business administration. The silence at the dinner table that night was deafening. My mother, Diana, 61, is the complete opposite. Warm, gentle, and understanding, she has always been the mediator in our family conflicts. Whenever Dad pushed too hard or criticized too harshly, Mom would step in with a soft word or a change of subject. She gave up a promising career as a high school principal to support Dad and raise us. Sometimes I catch a wistful look in her eyes when she talks about her teaching days, but she insists she has no regrets. Then there is my younger sister Natalie, 29, who had always been the golden child in our family. She followed the path Dad laid out perfectly, getting her accounting degree, joining his firm right after graduation, and quickly climbing the corporate ladder. She had always been Daddy's little girl, and he made no secret of how proud he was of her choices, often using her as an example of what I should have done. Our family dinners have always been a monthly ritual, non-negotiable. Even when I moved to my own apartment downtown, I knew the last Sunday of every month was reserved for dinner at my parents' house. These dinners have a predictable pattern. Mom cooks, something elaborate. Dad interrogates us about our professional achievements, and we all pretend to be more successful and happy than we actually are. Growing up, I constantly felt I was being measured against an impossible standard. My 4.0 GPA was met with, "Why not valedictorian?" My promotion to senior developer was dismissed with, "But when will you be a CTO?" My comfortable salary was always insufficient compared to what I could be making in investment banking. No matter how hard I tried, I was never quite good enough for Leonard Matthews. Despite all this, Natalie and I had always been close. As kids, we formed a united front against Dad's high-pressure tactics. We would sneak into each other's rooms after particularly brutal dinner interrogations to comfort each other. She would assure me that my coding projects were cool, and I would tell her that she was more than just her accounting skills. But something had changed in the past year. Natalie had become distant, canceling our weekly coffee meetups and responding to texts with short, generic replies. I assumed it was just the pressure of her new management position at Dad's company, but I missed our connection. The last few family dinners she had seemed distracted, checking her phone constantly and barely making eye contact. Our childhood home in Newton is exactly what you would expect from a successful businessman. A sprawling colonial with perfectly manicured lawns. A 3-car garage and a kitchen that looks like it belongs in a home design magazine. But rarely gets used except for these monthly dinners. Every corner of that house has memories, from the height marks on the kitchen doorframe to the dent in the study wall where I threw a book during a particularly heated argument with Dad about my career choice. Despite the tension, part of me still craved my parents' approval, especially Dad's. Even at 32, I found myself highlighting my successes and downplaying my struggles during these dinners. I would talk about the difficult coding problems I solved, but never mentioned the anxiety attacks I sometimes had before important meetings. I would share stories about client praise, but not about the weekends I spent alone too exhausted to socialize. Mom sometimes calls me during the week just to check in. During these calls, she sounds more relaxed, more like herself. She tells me she is proud of me, that she admires my independence. But at the dinners with Dad presiding over the table like a judge at court, she transforms into a supporting character in his narrative of family success. This was the complicated web of relationships I was navigating when I arrived at that fateful dinner, completely unaware that everything was about to change forever. The day of that dinner started like any ordinary Sunday. I woke up late, went for a run along the Charles River, and then spent a few hours debugging a persistent issue in a project due the following week. All the while, I had that familiar knot in my stomach, the one that always appears before family dinners. I tried to prepare, mentally reviewing my recent achievements to have ammunition for Dad's inevitable interrogation. At 5:30, I showered, put on a button-down shirt and khakis, the unofficial uniform for Matthew's family dinners, neither too casual nor too formal. I grabbed the bottle of red wine I had purchased the day before, knowing it was Dad's preferred vintage. These small gestures were my way of trying to stay in his good graces without completely compromising my identity. The drive to Newton took 40 minutes, and I spent it listening to a tech podcast, trying to distract myself from my growing anxiety. As I pulled into the familiar driveway, I noticed Natalie's silver Audi already parked next to Dad's Range Rover. She was usually late, so her early arrival was the first unusual sign of the evening. When Mom opened the door, her hug lasted a few seconds longer than normal. She wore her favorite pearl earrings, the ones Dad gave her for their 30th anniversary, and the house smelled of pot roast, my favorite childhood meal. Mom always made it when she sensed tension or wanted to soften a difficult conversation. Another warning sign I missed. In the living room, Dad was mixing drinks, unusually cheerful, as he handed me a bourbon on the rocks without my asking. He was telling a story about his golf game that morning, laughing loudly at his own jokes, his eyes never quite meeting mine. Mom busied herself in the kitchen, responding to his anecdotes with distracted ahs and ahs. Natalie sat stiffly on the edge of the sofa, nursing a glass of white wine that she had barely touched. She wore a high-necked blouse despite the warm May evening, and her normally immaculate makeup seemed hastily applied. When I sat beside her and bumped her shoulder playfully, her smile was tight and did not reach her eyes. Mom called us to dinner, and we took our usual seats, Dad at the head of the table, Mom to his right, Natalie to his left, and me opposite him. The conversation flowed with careful superficiality. Dad talked about the economy and his predictions for the market. Mom mentioned her garden club and the new restaurant in town. I shared sanitized stories about my work projects, careful to translate technical jargon into terms Dad might find impressive. Natalie barely spoke, pushing her pot roast around her plate and flinching slightly whenever Dad addressed her directly. I caught Mom looking at her with concern several times, but whenever I tried to catch my sister's eye, she looked away. As Mom cleared the dinner plates and brought out her apple pie, Dad leaned forward, swirling the remainder of his wine in his glass with unusual focus. The casual conversation died, and something in the air changed. Mom paused in the doorway between the dining room and kitchen, pie server in hand, her knuckles white against the handle. Dad set his glass down deliberately and turned to me, his expression suddenly serious. The cheerful facade vanished completely. His next words shattered the carefully maintained illusion of normalcy. "Tell me, Corey, the $500,000 I gave you, what did you do with it?" Time seemed to stop. I felt the blood drain from my face as I processed his question. My mind raced through every interaction with my father over the past several years, searching for any mention of such an amount. Had I forgotten something important? Was this some kind of test? $500,000. What do you mean? I finally managed to say, my voice sounding foreign to my own ears. Across the table, Natalie's face turned the color of chalk. She set her fork down with a clatter and stared intently at her plate. Mom stood frozen in the doorway, the pie forgotten in her hands. Dad's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Don't play dumb with me," he said, his voice dropping to that quiet tone he used when he was truly angry. "I have the transfer records right here." He pulled a folder from beside his chair and slapped it onto the table, sending his fork clattering to the floor. Mom flinched at the sound, but did not move to pick it up. "The transfer to your account, dated 3 months ago. $500,000 from the company's operational fund." He pushed the folder toward me. "Care to explain?" My hands shook as I reached for the documents, my mind still reeling with confusion. What transfer? What account? I had never seen that kind of money in my life, let alone received it from my father. The folder contained several printed bank statements and what appeared to be internal company transfer forms. I scanned them quickly, my confusion mounting with each page. There it was in black and white, a wire transfer for $500,000 from Matthews Financial Services to an account at First National Bank, with my name listed as the recipient. "But this makes no sense," I said, looking up from the papers. "I don't even have an account at First National." Dad's face hardened. "So, you're denying it? Even with the evidence right in front of you?" "Yes, I'm denying it, because I didn't receive any money from you or the company. I've never seen this account number before." I frantically flipped through the pages, looking for something. Anything that might explain this bizarre situation. "Then, show me your bank statements," Dad demanded, his voice rising. "Prove to me that $500,000 didn't suddenly appear in your accounts 3 months ago." I pulled out my phone, hands trembling as I logged into my bank app. "I'm telling you, Dad, I don't have this money. I've never had this kind of money." The balance of my savings account appeared on screen, a number so far from 500,000 that it would have been laughable in any other situation. I turned the phone toward him. "See? Nothing unusual here, and I can show you all my accounts. I don't have a secret stash anywhere." I noticed Natalie had not said a single word since Dad's accusation. She sat rigidly in her chair, eyes fixed on her untouched dessert. Dad barely glanced at my phone. "That doesn't prove anything. You could have moved it, invested it, or hidden it elsewhere by now." His voice was cold with disappointment and something worse, certainty. He truly believed I had stolen from him. Mom finally stepped forward, setting the pie down with unsteady hands. "Leonard, surely there's been some mistake." "Corey wouldn't." She trailed off as Dad turned his glare on her. "Wouldn't what, Diana? Wouldn't steal from his own family. Wouldn't betray my trust. We've given him everything, and this is how he repays us." Dad's voice cracked slightly, revealing the depth of his sense of betrayal. I felt sick. The room seemed to spin around me as the full weight of the accusation settled on my shoulders. My own father thought I was a thief. Years of feeling inadequate in his eyes suddenly paled in comparison to this new, terrible reality. "Look closer at those documents," I insisted. "There must be some mistake. Maybe it's a different Corey Matthews." Dad laughed bitterly. "In Boston, another Corey Matthews, with connections to me and my company." "Don't insult my intelligence." I turned to Natalie, desperate for support. "Nat, tell him this is crazy. You know I would never do something like this." Natalie finally looked up, her face a mask of misery. Her eyes darted between me and Dad before she whispered, "I think we should all calm down and figure this out rationally." Her non-committal response hit me like a physical blow. Even my sister wasn't defending me. Dad stood up abruptly, looming over the table. "I've already figured it out. The money disappeared from the company accounts exactly 12 weeks ago. The forensic accountant traced it to that account in your name. I wanted to give you the benefit of the doubt, to hear your explanation before taking more serious action." "What more serious action?" I asked, dread pooling in my stomach. Dad's expression was granite. If that money isn't returned to the company account within 1 week, I'll have no choice but to report this to the police. Company funds were stolen, Corey. That's embezzlement. That's a crime. Mom gasped. Leonard, no. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious in my life. Dad replied without taking his eyes off me. 1 week, Corey. Return every penny or face the consequences. I stood up so quickly my chair fell backward with a crash. This is insane. I didn't take any money. I'll go to the bank tomorrow. We'll sort this out. I'm telling you, someone's made a mistake or someone's set me up. Dad's laugh was hollow. Always an excuse. Always someone else's fault. Some things never change. I felt tears of frustration burning behind my eyes, but refused to let them fall. After all these years, after all my efforts to earn his respect, he still thought the worst of me. And now he was threatening to have me arrested for a crime I didn't commit. I looked from Dad's cold fury to Mom's tearful confusion to Natalie's averted gaze. My family, the people who were supposed to know me best, believe in me most, had already convicted me in their minds. Without another word, I grabbed my jacket and car keys. As I stormed toward the front door, I heard Mom call my name, her voice breaking. I paused for just a moment, hoping against hope that someone would come after me. Someone would say they believed me. The door closed behind me with a terrible finality. In the driveway, I sat in my car for several minutes, too shaken to drive the engine idling as I tried to process what had just happened. Through the living room window, I could see shadowy figures, gesturing mouths moving in what was surely a heated discussion about what to do with their criminal son. 1 week, Dad had said. 1 week to solve a mystery I didn't even understand. I drove home in a daze, barely registering the familiar streets and traffic lights. My mind kept replaying Dad's accusation, seeing Natalie's pale face, feeling the weight of that folder in my hands. By the time I reached my apartment, my shock had begun to crystallize into determination. I might not know what was going on, but I was going to find out. First thing Monday morning, I called in sick to work, something I had done maybe twice in my entire career. This situation required my full attention. My reputation, my freedom, and whatever remained of my family relationships hung in the balance. My first stop was my bank. I sat across from a personal banker named Tracy, explaining that I needed to verify all accounts associated with my name and social security number. She looked confused but obliged, typing away at her computer for several minutes before confirming what I already knew. I had exactly 2 accounts with them, checking and savings with balances that were respectable but nowhere near $500,000. No. There have been no large deposits or withdrawals in the past 6 months, she confirmed. And we have no record of any accounts at First National linked to your identity. That was something, at least. Next, I drove across town to the local branch of First National Bank. The process there was more complicated since I wasn't a customer. After some persuasion and explanation, a manager agreed to check if there were any accounts under my name. Yes, Mr. Matthews, we do show an account opened 3 months ago in the name of Corey L. Matthews, he confirmed, looking at his screen. My heart sank. But then, I caught a crucial detail. L. My middle initial is A for Alan. I pointed this out to the manager. He frowned, checking something else on his computer. The identification used to open the account shows Corey Lewis Matthews, born October 12, 1991. That's not me, I said, relief flooding through me. I was born in 1990, and my full name is Corey Allen Matthews. I pulled out my driver's license to prove it. The manager looked troubled. This is concerning. I cannot give you any details about this account due to privacy laws, but I strongly suggest you file an identity theft report with the police. I left the bank with mixed feelings. I had confirmation that someone else had opened an account using a name very similar to mine, which supported my innocence. But this also meant someone had deliberately set me up, and I had no idea who or why. My next step was to consult a lawyer. I called my friend Mike, who worked in corporate law, and arranged to meet him for lunch. Over sandwiches at a quiet deli, I laid out the whole bizarre situation. Mike whistled low. "Your dad actually threatened to report you to the police." "That's harsh, man." "You're telling me," I said, pushing my barely touched food around my plate. "So, what do I do?" Mike considered this. "First, document everything. Get copies of your bank statements showing no unusual activity. File that identity theft report. Then I hate to say this, but you might need to investigate your dad's company a bit. Find out exactly where that money came from and where it went. Isn't that illegal?" Investigating his company, Mike shook his head. "I'm not saying hack into their systems. But you mentioned your sister works there, right? Maybe she can help you understand what happened." Natalie. Just thinking about her strange behavior at dinner made my stomach clench. She had been acting weird for months, and her reaction to Dad's accusation was suspicious to say the least. But she was my sister. Surely she wouldn't set me up for a crime, would she? After leaving Mike, I tried calling Natalie several times. All my calls went straight to voicemail. I sent texts, emails, even a Facebook message, all with the same plea: "We need to talk. Please, I know something's wrong. Let me help." No response. That evening, I did something I had never done before. I researched my father's company. As a privately held firm, much of Matthew's financial services information wasn't publicly available, but I found press releases, LinkedIn profiles, and local business news articles. I was looking for anything unusual, any recent changes or problems. An article from a local business journal caught my eye. It mentioned that Matthews Financial had recently hired several new staff members. As part of an expansion, including a junior accountant named Corey Lewis, who had previously worked at a competitor firm. My heart raced as I read the name. Corey Lewis. Corey L. Matthews. The coincidence was too perfect. I searched for this Corey Lewis online and found a LinkedIn profile with a photo of a young man who looked nothing like me. According to his profile, he had started at Matthews Financial exactly 4 months ago. The pieces were starting to come together, but I still couldn't see the full picture. Why would someone create a fake bank account that mixed my name with this new employee's, and who had transferred the company's money into it? There was one person who might know Natalie. As Dad's right hand at the company, she would have access to all the financial records. She would know about new employees. She would understand the company's money flow. After 3 days of unanswered messages, I decided on a more direct approach. I knew Natalie stopped at the same coffee shop near Dad's office every morning. The next day, I positioned myself at a corner table at 7:30 and waited. Sure enough, at 8:15, Natalie walked in looking exhausted and distracted. She ordered her usual latte and turned to leave when she spotted me. For a moment, she looked like she might bolt, but then resignation crossed her face. She walked over and sat down across from me. "You've been avoiding me," I said quietly. She stared into her coffee cup. "I'm sorry, Corey, I couldn't. Couldn't what defend me when Dad accused me of stealing? Tell the truth about whatever's going on." I kept my voice low but couldn't hide my hurt and anger. Natalie's eyes filled with tears. "You don't understand. It's complicated." "Then uncomplicate it for me," I urged. I found out about Corey Lewis and the account at First National. What I don't understand is why someone would set me up like this. And why you're letting it happen. Natalie's hands trembled so badly she had to set down her coffee. "It's not what you think," she whispered, her voice barely audible in the busy cafe. "What is it then?" I leaned forward. "Tell me, Nat. Whatever it is, we can figure it out together, like we always have." For a long moment, Natalie said nothing, staring at her coffee as if it might offer an escape. Finally, she looked up, her eyes, red-rimmed and hollow. "I did it," she whispered. "I took the money." The world seemed to stop. Of all the scenarios I had imagined, my perfect, successful sister stealing from our father had never crossed my mind. "You. But why?" How I stammered, struggling to process this revelation. Natalie glanced around nervously before continuing in a low voice. "It started about a year ago. I was at a casino with some friends from college just for fun. I won a little money, and it felt amazing. The rush was like nothing I'd ever experienced." She paused, swallowing hard. "I started going back. At first, just on weekends. Then, more often. I was winning enough to keep going. And, when I started losing, I was sure my luck would turn around." I listened in growing horror as my sister described her descent into gambling addiction. How the occasional casino visits turned into online poker games played late into the night. How she maxed out her credit cards, took out personal loans, even borrowed money from friends, with no way to repay them. I was in debt for over $100,000 when I got desperate. She continued, her voice hollow. "I knew Dad never checked the operational accounts personally. He trusted me to handle that. So I borrowed a little, just $50,000 at first. I was absolutely sure I could win it back and replace it before anyone noticed. But you didn't win it back, I guessed." She laughed bitterly. "I lost it. So I took more, thinking I just needed a bigger stake to win back everything. It was a vicious cycle. Before I knew it, I had taken $500,000. And you blamed me I couldn't keep the hurt from my voice." Natalie shook her head vehemently. "Not at first. I created a fake transfer record showing the money going to an account I controlled. But then Dad started asking questions about discrepancies in the books. He was talking about bringing in external auditors. I was terrified. I knew they'd trace everything back to me. So I modified the records, created a new trail. I used this new guy's name, Corey Lewis, but changed it slightly to match yours. I thought it would buy me time to figure something out. I never believed Dad would actually accuse you to your face without more proof. I never thought he'd threaten to go to the police." Her voice broke on the last word, and she covered her face with her hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I sat back, feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. My own sister had not only stolen from our father, but had deliberately set things up to cast suspicion on me. The betrayal cut deep. So, when Dad confronted me at dinner, I was in shock. Natalie admitted, dropping her hands to reveal mascara-streaked cheeks. I had no idea he had connected those dots already, or that he would confront you like that. When he showed up with those printouts, I nearly fainted. I was sure he had figured out it was me. "So, you let him accuse me. You sat there and said nothing while he threatened to have me arrested." I said, my voice hardening. "I'm sorry, Corey." I panicked. I didn't know what to do. She reached across the table for my hand, but I pulled away. "What were you planning to do?" "Just let me take the fall for this." "No," Natalie protested. "I was going to fix it somehow. I've been trying to get the money back. I've been selling things, looking for loans. But it's not enough. Not nearly enough." I ran my hands through my hair, trying to think. What happens if Dad goes through with his threat? If he reports the theft? Natalie went even paler. "I'll go to jail. Embezzlement of that amount." She couldn't finish the sentence. Despite my anger, I felt a surge of protectiveness toward my little sister. She had made terrible choices, but she was still Natalie, who had defended me from bullies in elementary school, who had stayed up all night, helping me study for calculus, who had stood by me when I chose a career Dad disapproved of. Have you tried getting help? For the gambling, I asked more gently. Natalie nodded miserably. I started going to Gamblers Anonymous meetings 2 weeks ago. And I haven't placed a bet in 10 days. She said it like it was a tremendous achievement, which I realized for her, it probably was. 10 days, I repeated, processing everything. So what happens now, I don't know, she admitted. I'm so scared, Corey. Dad will never forgive me. He'll press charges. I know he will. And Mom. It will break her heart. We sat in silence for several minutes, the cheerful bustle of the coffee shop at odds with the heavy conversation at our table. We have to tell them the truth, I finally said. All of it. Tonight. Natalie's face crumpled. I can't. I just can't face him. You have to, I insisted. Otherwise, I'm the one who's going to end up paying for your mistakes. Is that what you want? Of course not. She whispered, tears flowing freely now. Then, we do this together. Tonight. I reached across the table and took her hand, finally offering the comfort she had been seeking. I'm angry, Nat. Incredibly angry. But I'm not going to abandon you. That's not what family does. Her fingers clutched mine desperately. What if he doesn't forgive me? I thought about our father, his rigid principles, his unyielding expectations. I honestly don't know, I admitted, but keeping the truth from him isn't an option anymore. And who knows, maybe this will finally force him to see us as real people, not just extensions of himself and his success. As we left the coffee shop, I felt a strange mix of emotions, betrayal and anger at what Natalie had done, fear of the confrontation to come, but also a strange sense of liberation. For the first time in my adult life, I was about to face my father, not from a position of seeking approval, but from one of moral clarity. Whatever happened next, at least the truth would finally be out in the open. On the drive to our parents' house that evening, Natalie was so quiet, I could hear her shallow, rapid breathing over the hum of the engine. I had spent the afternoon in a strange, calm state, like the eye of a hurricane, preparing myself for what was to come. I had insisted Natalie go to work as usual to avoid raising Dad's suspicions while I planned what we would say. When we pulled into the driveway, Natalie froze her hand on the door handle. I can't do this, she whispered. You can, I said firmly. You have to. I'll be right beside you. Inside, Mom seemed surprised, but pleased to see us both. Your father's in his study, she said, giving us each a quick hug. Is everything all right? You both look so serious. We need to talk to Dad, I said. All of us together. It's important. Mom's smile faded, concern replacing it. She sensed the gravity of the situation immediately, as mothers often do. I'll get him, she said quietly. We settled in the living room, Natalie perched on the edge of the sofa, as if ready to bolt at any moment. I sat beside her, close enough that our shoulders touched, a silent reminder of my support. Dad entered with a guarded expression, Mom trailing behind him. What's this about? He asked, not sitting down. His gaze flicked between Natalie and me, lingering on me with suspicion. Have you come to return what you took? Actually, Dad, that's exactly why we're here, I said steadily. To tell you the truth about the money. The whole truth. Dad's eyebrows rose slightly. So you're admitting it? No, I'm not. Because I didn't take it. I looked at Natalie. Oh, but someone at this table knows who did. All eyes turned to my sister. She seemed to shrink under the attention, looking smaller and more vulnerable than I had ever seen her. Her hands twisted in her lap, knuckles white with tension. Natalie, Mom prompted gently. What do you know about this? Natalie took a shaky breath, then another. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. I took the money. Dad stared at her blankly, as if the words made no sense. What did you say? It was me. Dad, Natalie repeated, her voice slightly stronger. I embezzled from the company. I created the false paper trail pointing to Corey. I'm the one who stole $500,000. Dad's face went through a remarkable transformation: confusion, disbelief, dawning comprehension, and finally, a terrible anger mixed with profound hurt. How, why? He demanded, his voice hoarse. Natalie told the story again, much as she had told me that morning, though with frequent pauses to collect herself. She explained about the gambling, the mounting debts, the desperation, and finally the attempt to cover her tracks by implicating me. As she spoke, Dad sank slowly into his armchair, the color draining from his face. Mom moved to stand behind him, one hand on his shoulder, her own expression a mask of shock and distress. When Natalie finished, the room fell into a heavy silence. Dad stared at her as if seeing a stranger. Say something, please, Natalie. Finally whispered. What do you want me to say? Dad asked, his voice dangerously quiet. That it's all right. That I understand. That I forgive you for stealing from me, lying to me, and trying to frame your brother. Natalie flinched at each accusation. No, I don't expect that. What? Dad's voice rose suddenly. You just thought you'd confess and everything would be fine. Do you have any idea what you've done? This isn't just about the money. You've betrayed my trust. You've compromised the company's financial integrity. You've committed a crime, Natalie. A serious crime. I know, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't replace $500,000, Dad snapped. Sorry doesn't undo the damage to the company. Sorry doesn't erase the fact that you were willing to let your brother take the fall for your actions. I felt I needed to step in. Dad, what Natalie did was wrong. Seriously wrong. But before you talk about damage and betrayal, maybe you should ask yourself some questions too. Dad turned his glare on me. What is that supposed to mean? I mean that Natalie didn't become desperate enough to do this in a vacuum, I said, meeting his gaze steadily. She was drowning in expectations, in the need to be perfect, to live up to the impossible standard you set. We both were. Don't you dare blame me for her choices, Dad growled. I'm not excusing what she did, I clarified. But I am suggesting that maybe, just maybe, the pressure cooker environment you created played a part in pushing her to the breaking point. Mom spoke for the first time, her voice gentle but firm. Leonard, listen to him. You know there's some truth to what Corey's saying. Dad shot her a betrayed look, but she continued. You've always pushed the children so hard, expected so much, demanded perfection, and when they succeeded, you just raised the bar higher instead of celebrating their achievements. This is absurd, Dad protested. I pushed them to excel, to reach their potential. What parent doesn't want that for their children? There's a difference between encouraging excellence and demanding perfection, I said quietly. One builds confidence. The other creates fear of failure, so great you'll do anything to avoid it, including making terrible choices. Natalie looked up, her expression raw with emotion. He's right, Dad. I was so terrified of disappointing you, of not being your perfect, successful daughter anymore. When I started losing at gambling, I couldn't accept it. I couldn't face you with a failure. So I kept trying to fix it, and it just got worse and worse. Dad stood abruptly, pacing the room. So this is my fault, he demanded. I'm responsible for your criminal behavior because I had high expectations. Do you have any idea how ridiculous that sounds? No, your expectations didn't make Natalie steal, I acknowledged. But they created an environment where she felt she couldn't come to you when she was in trouble, where hiding her problems seemed like the only option. That hit home. Dad stopped pacing, something shifting in his expression. "Natalie," he said, his voice slightly less harsh. "Why didn't you come to me when you first got into trouble?" Natalie gave a bitter laugh through her tears. "And tell you what? That I'd been gambling, that I'd lost control, that I'd failed. You would have been so disappointed, so angry." "Yes, I would have been angry," Dad admitted. "But I would have helped you. I'm your father, for God's sake. Would you have? Really? Or would you have lectured me about responsibility and poor choices and how I was throwing my life away?" Dad had no answer for that, and his silence was telling. "I need that money back," he finally said, his tone businesslike, retreating to the familiar territory of financial matters. "All of it. And I need to know exactly how you manipulated the books. We'll need to correct everything before the quarterly audit." Natalie nodded miserably. "I'll show you everything, and I'll pay it back every penny. I've already sold my car and some jewelry. I'm looking for a personal loan to cover the rest." "That won't be nearly enough," Dad said harshly, "and no bank will give you a loan of that size without collateral." "Then I'll sell my condo," Natalie offered desperately. "I'll get a second job. I'll do whatever it takes." Dad sighed heavily, rubbing his temples. "You realize I could press charges." "Should press charges," Mom gasped. "Leonard." "No, she's your daughter. She's also an employee who embezzled company funds," Diana, Dad shot back. "The board would expect me to take legal action." I stood up, moving to stand beside Natalie. "If you do that, you'll destroy her life. One mistake, no matter how serious, and you're willing to throw away your relationship with your daughter. Is that really who you want to be?" Dad glared at me. "Don't lecture me about relationships, Corey. This isn't just about family. It's about business, integrity, principles." "No, it's about forgiveness," I countered. "About second chances. About recognizing that people you love can make terrible mistakes and still deserve compassion." A heavy silence fell over the room. I could almost see Dad's internal struggle playing out on his face, the businessman warring with the father. Finally, he spoke, his voice tight with controlled emotion. "I won't press charges, but I have conditions. You resign from the company immediately, Natalie. You agree to continue getting help for your gambling. And you repay every cent, no matter how long it takes." Natalie nodded, fresh tears spilling over. "Thank you, Dad. I promise I'll make this right. You can stay in the condo for now." Dad continued, still not looking at her. "Selling it in a rush would mean taking a loss. We'll work out a repayment plan." The practical details settled. Another uncomfortable silence fell. None of us seemed to know what to say next, how to navigate this new family dynamic where secrets had been exposed and trust shattered. "I think," Dad said slowly, "that we all need some time to process this." He looked older, suddenly, the weight of the evening's revelations visible in the slump of his shoulders. I felt a surge of unexpected compassion for him. For all his flaws, he was also a man, seeing his carefully constructed worldview crumbling around him, forced to confront uncomfortable truths about himself and his children. "Before we go," I said, "there's one more thing that needs to be said. Dad, you owe me an apology." Dad's head snapped up, his expression darkening. "Excuse me. You accused me of stealing from you. You threatened to have me arrested for something I didn't do. You were ready to believe the worst of me without even giving me a fair chance to explain." I stood my ground, meeting his gaze. "I deserve an apology for that." For a tense moment, I thought he might refuse. His jaw worked as he struggled with his pride. Then remarkably his expression softened fractionally. "You're right," he said, the words clearly difficult for him. I jumped to conclusions. I should have investigated more thoroughly before confronting you. I was wrong, and I'm sorry. It wasn't a particularly gracious apology. But coming from Leonard Matthews, it was unprecedented. I nodded my acceptance, not trusting myself to speak past the sudden lump in my throat. As Natalie and I left the house, the future still uncertain, but the truth finally out in the open, I realized something had fundamentally changed in our family tonight. Whether it was for better or worse remained to be seen. But there was no going back to the careful pretense that had defined us for so long. 6 months have passed since that explosive family dinner. 6 months of painful honesty, difficult conversations, and slow tentative rebuilding of trust. The journey hasn't been easy for any of us, but it has been necessary. True to her word, Natalie has been working hard to address her gambling addiction. She attends Gamblers Anonymous meetings 3 times a week and sees a therapist specializing in addiction. She says the urge is still there, especially when she's stressed or upset, but she's learning healthier ways to cope with difficult emotions instead of seeking the temporary escape of gambling. Dad followed through on his conditions. Natalie resigned from the company the very next day. A carefully worded announcement cited personal reasons for her departure, preserving her professional reputation. Dad may have been angry, but he still protected her in that way at least. The financial resolution has been more complicated. Natalie sold her luxury car and some expensive jewelry. But that only covered a fraction of the debt. She found a new job at a smaller accounting firm, taking a significant pay cut in the process. She now lives on a strict budget, putting most of her salary toward repaying Dad. At this rate, it will take her years to clear the debt completely. But she seems committed to making it right, one payment at a time. As for me, my relationship with Dad has undergone the most surprising transformation. 2 weeks after our confrontation, he called and asked if I would meet him for lunch, just the 2 of us. I agreed with considerable apprehension, unsure what to expect. I found him at the restaurant looking uncharacteristically casual, in a sweater, rather than his usual suit. He seemed nervous, fiddling with his water glass, as I sat down across from him. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said," he began without preamble, "about expectations and pressure, and how I've treated you and your sister." I waited, sensing he had more to say. "I didn't have an easy childhood," he continued, surprising me with this glimpse into his past that he rarely discussed. "My father worked 2 jobs and we still barely made ends meet. Education was my only way out of poverty. Excellence wasn't optional for me, it was survival." I watched as he struggled to articulate thoughts that had perhaps never been put into words before. "I wanted to give my children everything I didn't have," he said. "Security, opportunity. But somewhere along the way, I think I confused providing those things with demanding perfection in return, as if you owed me success for the advantages I gave you." It was the most self-aware thing I had ever heard my father say. "I don't think you're entirely wrong to want us to do well, Dad," I offered. "But there's a difference between supporting success and only offering love when we achieve it." He winced slightly, but nodded. "I'm trying to understand that difference." That lunch was the first of many conversations where we began to know each other as adults, not just as father and son bound by expectation and disappointment. It hasn't been a straight line of progress. Dad still slips into his old patterns. Sometimes still occasionally makes cutting remarks about my career choices. But now I can point it out when it happens, and he actually listens. Sometimes he even apologizes. Mom has found her voice in the family in ways I never expected. With the fragile facade of family perfection shattered, she has stepped into a more active role. No longer just the peacekeeper, but an equal participant. She started teaching part-time at a community college, rekindling her old passion for education. The light in her eyes when she talks about her students is something new and beautiful. Natalie and I have grown closer through this ordeal. We meet for coffee every Sunday now, a standing appointment where we check in with each other honestly about our struggles and victories. She's still recovering, still fighting her addiction day by day, but there's a new authenticity to her that was missing before. Without the pressure to be perfect, she's discovering who she really is and what she actually wants from life. Last month, we had another family dinner, the first since that fateful night. It was awkward at first, all of us hyper-aware of the elephant in the room. But as the evening progressed, something remarkable happened. We started talking, really talking. Not about achievements or appearances or what the neighbors would think, but about feelings and fears and hopes. Dad asked about my latest coding project and actually listened to the technical details without dismissing them. Mom shared stories from her classroom. Natalie talked openly about a recent challenge with her recovery and how she handled it. It wasn't perfect or polished, but it was real in a way our family gatherings had never been before. As I drove home that night, I realized that the $500,000 question had cost us dearly in some ways, but it had also purchased something invaluable: truth, the painful, necessary truth that had finally broken us out of roles we had been playing for decades. The most profound lesson I've taken from all this is that real family isn't built on success or appearances or meeting expectations. It's built on acceptance, forgiveness, and the courage to see each other as we really are, flaws and all. Perfect families don't exist. Only real ones do, with all their messy complications and painful growth. I've learned that sometimes you have to lose something valuable to discover what's truly priceless. My sister had to lose her carefully constructed image of success to find genuine healing. My father had to lose his illusion of control to discover actual connection with his children. And I had to lose my desperate need for approval to find my own voice in the family. Today, as I write this, I'm preparing for another family dinner tonight. I no longer approach these gatherings with dread, but with cautious hope. We're still learning how to be honest with each other, still discovering what our family can be when it's built on truth rather than expectations. There are still difficult moments. The financial consequences of Natalie's actions will follow her for years. Dad still struggles with his ingrained tendency to judge and control. Mom sometimes slips back into her peacekeeper role rather than expressing her own feelings. And I still occasionally find myself editing my words, measuring my worth against some imagined standard of success. But we're trying, really trying. And that effort itself is something new and precious. If you're watching this and struggling with family expectations, addiction, or the weight of secrets, I hope our story gives you courage. The truth can be terrifying to face, but living behind masks is ultimately more destructive. Whatever your situation, you don't have to carry it alone. Reach out. Get help. Take that first scary step toward honesty. Sometimes the most painful conversations are the ones we most need to have. And sometimes what seems like the end of everything is actually the beginning of something more authentic and meaningful than you ever imagined possible. What about you? Has your family ever faced a crisis that ultimately brought you closer together? Or are you struggling with family expectations that feel impossible to meet? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to hear more real-life stories of family challenges and healing. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I wish you courage in facing your own truths, whatever they may be.